The aliens blockaded Earth. Then a human ship came through their lines carrying a terrifying message. For 6 years, 3 months, and 11 days, no ship had entered or left the Sol system without permission from the Kael'thari Compact. Fleet Admiral Vren Shakal had counted every one of those days. He counted them the way a jailer counts the years a prisoner has served, with a strange mixture of pride and weariness. He commanded the largest blockade force ever assembled by the Compact, 400 warships arranged in a slow, rotating shell around the 9th planet's orbit, watching, waiting, making sure that the humans stayed exactly where they were. The war that had started it all was short. It lasted only 40 days, but those 40 days had changed everything the Compact believed about the galaxy. Before the war, the Kael'thari and their allied species, the quiet, patient Dorun, and the small but clever Yis, had expanded across 100 star systems without meeting a single species that could truly fight back. Every world they found was either empty or too weak to resist. Diplomacy had never really been tested because it had never been needed. Then they found Earth. The first contact had gone wrong in a way nobody expected. A Kael'thari survey ship, doing nothing more than routine mapping, had entered the outer edge of the Sol system. Human deep space sensors detected it within hours. Within a day, 3 human warships were burning hard toward the intruder. The Kael'thari captain, following standard procedure, tried to establish communication. The humans did not wait for translation software to finish its work. They fired first, disabled the ship's engines, and boarded it before the crew could even activate the self-destruct. Vren had read the reports so many times he could recite them without looking. The Compact had sent that survey ship in peace. The humans had treated it as an act of war, and when the Compact sent a proper delegation to explain the misunderstanding, the humans had responded with something the Compact had never encountered before: absolute, immediate, overwhelming aggression. Not from panic. Not from fear. From calculation. The human fleet that met the Compact's peace envoy analyzed its weapons systems in real time, found the weak points, and destroyed 3 escort ships in under 2 minutes, before the flagship carrying the actual diplomats had even finished broadcasting its greeting. It was later, after the short war ended in an uneasy ceasefire, that the Compact learned the terrible truth. The humans had not attacked out of malice. They had attacked because their species had a long and brutal history of being conquered, colonized, and nearly destroyed by other humans. They had learned, over thousands of years, that unknown armed ships approaching your home were rarely there to make friends. Their instinct was not diplomacy first. Their instinct was survival first, questions later. That instinct terrified the Compact more than any weapon could have. A species that assumed the worst and acted on it immediately, and turned out to be right often enough to have survived to build starships, was a species that could not be reasoned with in the old way. So the Compact High Council made its decision. Humanity would not be allowed to leave its home system. Not until the Compact understood exactly what humans were capable of, and not until they were certain humanity posed no threat to the 100 worlds the Compact had already claimed. That had been 6 years ago. The blockade had been built to last as long as necessary. Vren stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Watchful Accord, looking at the tactical display that hung in the air before him. Sol system glowed at the center, a small yellow star with its collection of planets, and around the 3rd planet, Earth, a faint blue haze marked the edge of human-controlled space. Beyond that haze, arranged in a slow and careful shell, were the glowing markers of his 400 ships. Nothing had crossed that shell in 6 years, not a single cargo ship, not a single probe, not a single unauthorized transmission that the Compact's listening posts hadn't caught and traced within minutes. The humans had tried, in the early years. There had been 3 attempts to break through, all small, all desperate, all failed. The Compact ships had not needed to fire a single shot to stop them. They simply surrounded the fleeing vessels and forced them back, using tractor fields and overwhelming numbers rather than weapons. Vren had given strict orders. No human ship was to be destroyed unless it opened fire first. The Compact wanted information, not martyrs. After those first failed attempts, the humans had stopped trying. For the last 4 years, Sol system had been quiet. Human ships still moved between their own planets and moons, still built things, still communicated among themselves in encrypted bursts that Compact linguists had only partially cracked, but nothing tried to leave. Vren found the silence unsettling. He had expected anger. He had expected more desperate attempts, more grand gestures of defiance. Instead, humanity had simply gone quiet, like a wounded animal that had decided to heal in the dark rather than fight while injured. His intelligence officers told him this was a good sign, that the humans had accepted their situation and were focusing on internal recovery. Vren was not so sure. In his experience, quiet things were often more dangerous than loud things. A loud animal was announcing its position. A quiet one was planning. Admiral. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Doss, a young Dorun officer who had served under Vren for the past 2 years. Dorun were tall and slow-moving, with skin like pale gray stone, and they made excellent sensor operators because almost nothing startled them. If Doss sounded urgent, something was actually happening. Report, Vren said, turning from the display. Sensor contact. Small vessel, human design, departing high orbit from the northern hemisphere of Earth. Vector suggests it is heading directly for the blockade line. Current speed is low, but accelerating. Vren felt something tighten in his chest, an old and familiar feeling from the war. Size and armament? Small, Admiral, smaller than any of our corvettes. Passive scans show minimal weapons signature, if any at all. It could be an unarmed transport. Could be, Vren repeated. He had learned, during the 40-day war, never to trust the phrase minimal weapons signature when it came to humans. Their engineers had a talent for hiding capability behind harmless appearances. A cargo ship that looked unarmed on sensors had once turned out to be carrying a swarm of 100 armed drones, deployed in less time than it took the compact ship encountering it to raise its shields. Bring the fleet to standard alert, Vren ordered. No aggressive maneuvers yet. I want every ship in the intercept path to hold position and observe. If this is another desperate breakout attempt, I want it handled the way we handled the others. Surround, do not fire, force it back. Yes, Admiral. Doss relayed the order, and across the vast formation of the blockade fleet, 400 ships began to shift, adjusting their positions with the patient precision of a species that had never needed to rush. Vren watched the small marker on the display as it crossed the orbit of the outer planets, moving steadily toward the edge of compact controlled space. He noted, with something between admiration and unease, that the ship was not trying to hide. It broadcasted no false signals, made no attempt to slip past sensor sweeps in the gaps between patrol routes, the way the earlier breakout attempts had tried and failed to do. It simply flew, in a straight line, directly toward the nearest point of the blockade shell, as if daring the compact to stop it. Any communication from the vessel? Vren asked. None yet, Admiral. Standard human transponder codes only. Registry shows the ship's name as... Doss paused, and something in his stone-gray face shifted, a flicker of an expression Vren had learned to associate with Dorun's surprise. The ship's registry translates to, last word, Admiral. Vren said nothing for a long moment. In his experience, humans did not name their vessels carelessly. A cargo hauler might be named after a river or a mountain. A warship might carry the name of a battle or a hero. But last word was neither. It was a statement. It was a message before the message had even been delivered. Get me Fleet Marshal Catherine, Vren said. She will want to know about this personally. Fleet Marshal Catherine commanded the entire blockade operation from her command station orbiting the outer edge of the system, and she answered the call within moments, her three-eyed Kelthari face appearing on the display, composed as always. Catherine had led the original peace delegation that had been so badly mauled during first contact, and she carried the memory of that day like a wound that had never fully closed. Report, Admiral Shakal, she said. A single human vessel has departed Earth orbit and is heading for the blockade line. Small, apparently lightly armed or unarmed. It is not attempting to hide its approach. Sensors show its registry name translates as last word. Catherine's three eyes narrowed slightly, the Kelthari equivalent of a frown. A name like that is not chosen by accident. My thoughts exactly, Marshal. What is your assessment? Vren considered the question carefully before answering. This is not like the earlier attempts. Those ships tried to hide, tried to slip past our patrols in the dark. This one is announcing itself. I believe it wants to be seen. I believe it wants to be stopped, so that whoever is aboard can speak to us directly. You think this is a diplomatic gesture? I think it might be, or it might be a trap of a kind we have not yet imagined. The humans have had 6 years to prepare for this moment, Marshal. Whatever this ship is, and whatever it is carrying, they have thought about it for a very long time. Catherine was silent for several seconds, her attention clearly on data scrolling somewhere off-screen. The High Council will want to be informed immediately. In the meantime, Admiral, your orders stand. Do not fire unless fired upon. If this ship wishes to speak, we will listen. But keep every weapon system ready. If this is a trap, I want the fleet able to respond within a single heartbeat. Understood, Marshal. The channel closed, and Vren turned back to the tactical display. The small marker representing the last word continued its steady climb away from Earth, crossing the orbit of Mars, then the scattered debris field the compact had designated as a checkpoint, then continuing outward with an unhurried confidence that Vren found more alarming than any aggressive maneuver could have been. Desperation looked like speed and panic. This looked like patience. This looked like a ship that knew exactly what it was doing, and was not afraid of the 400 warships waiting for it. Distance to nearest blockade elements? Vren asked. 2 hours at current acceleration, Admiral, Doss reported. The ship is on a direct course for the 3rd Fleet position. Commodore Uras has already been alerted and is preparing intercept formations. Tell Uras to hold his formation loose. I want the ship able to stop and communicate without feeling trapped. If we surround it too tightly, too quickly, we may provoke exactly the kind of response we are trying to avoid. Yes, Admiral. Vren stood in the quiet hum of the command deck, watching the small marker creep across the display, and found his mind drifting back to the 40-day war, to the images his intelligence officers had shown him afterward. Human cities lit at night, seen from orbit, uncountable lights spread across the dark curve of the planet like scattered stars. Human factories running day and night, converting raw material into ships and weapons at a pace that had shocked compact economists. Human soldiers, ordinary people pulled from ordinary lives, adapting to unfamiliar alien technology within days, sometimes hours, finding weaknesses that compact engineers had spent decades trying to hide. The compact had won the war, in the sense that the humans had eventually agreed to a ceasefire and accepted the blockade, rather than continuing to fight a war they could not yet win against a coalition with 100 worlds behind it. He believed, and had said so quietly to only a few trusted officers, that the humans had simply decided the cost of continued fighting was not worth it yet. Not yet. The word haunted him. It suggested that somewhere in humanity's calculations, there existed a future point where the cost would become worth it, and Vren suspected that the compact would not enjoy discovering when that point arrived. Admiral, Doss said, his voice carrying a new note of tension. The vessel is broadcasting now. It is not encrypted. It is being sent openly, on all standard frequencies, in compact trade language. Play it. The voice that came through the command deck speakers was calm, measured, and unmistakably human, though the words had been translated by the ship's own systems into fluent, careful compact trade language, the kind used for negotiations between species who did not share a native tongue. This is Captain Elena Voss of the human vessel Last Word, speaking on behalf of the Unified Earth Council. We are not armed for combat. We are not attempting to break your blockade by force. We are carrying a message that must reach the highest levels of the Kelthari Compact, the Doruan Assembly, and the Yis Concordance without delay. This message concerns a threat to every species behind your blockade line, including your own. We request safe passage to deliver it in person. We will not resist inspection. We will not resist escort. We ask only that you listen before you decide anything else. The message repeated, looping steadily, broadcasting into the dark toward the waiting fleet. Vren stood very still, watching the small marker on the display continue its patient approach, and felt the old unease in his chest deepen into something closer to dread. 6 years of silence, and this was how it ended. Not with an attack, not with a desperate escape, with a single ship, a single captain, and a message the humans believed was important enough to risk everything to deliver. Get me the Marshal again, Vren said quietly, and alert every fleet commander in the blockade line. Nobody fires. Nobody moves without my direct order. Whatever this message is, I have a feeling we are all about to wish we had heard it sooner. Behind him, the small marker representing the last word continued its steady, unafraid journey toward the edge of compact space, carrying whatever truth Captain Elena Voss had risked her life to bring. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Vren Shakal began to understand that the 6 years of careful, patient blockade had perhaps bought the compact nothing but time they did not know they needed, and had not known how to use. The fleet held its position, 400 ships arranged in their slow and careful shell, and waited to find out exactly what kind of message was worth a human risking everything to deliver by hand. Inside the last word, Captain Elena Voss sat in the small command chair of a ship that had never been built for comfort. It had been built for one purpose only: to survive the 2 hours it would take to reach the blockade line, and to survive whatever happened after that. She was 44 years old, with gray beginning to show at her temples, and she had spent the last 6 years training for a mission she had hoped would never actually be necessary. Now that it was happening, she found herself surprisingly calm, the way a person can be calm once a decision has already been made and there is nothing left to do but carry it out. Behind her, in the cramped secondary chair, sat her only crewmate, a young systems specialist named Marcus Ibe, who had volunteered for the mission 8 months ago and had not slept properly in the 3 days since launch had been confirmed. Marcus was 26, brilliant with encryption and signal processing, and terrified in a way he was doing his best to hide. Elena did not blame him. She was terrified too. She had simply had more practice not showing it. 2 hours to intercept, Marcus said, watching the navigation display. The lead alien formation is holding position. They're not moving to block us yet. They're being careful, Elena said. That's good. Careful means they're thinking, not reacting. Or it means they're setting a trap. Could be that too. Elena did not sugarcoat things for her crew, even a crew of one nervous young man. But if they wanted to destroy us, Marcus, they could have done it the moment we cleared Earth's defense perimeter. They didn't. They're watching. That tells me they still want information more than they want a body count. Marcus nodded, though his hands remained tight on the edge of his console. The message is still broadcasting? On a loop. Every channel they might be listening on. Elena glanced at the small screen showing the outgoing transmission, her own recorded voice repeating steadily into the dark. This is Captain Elena Voss, of the human vessel Last Word. This is Captain Elena Voss, of the human vessel Last Word. She had recorded it dozens of times before launch, trying to find exactly the right tone, calm but urgent, respectful but not weak. The council had debated the wording for 3 straight weeks before approving the final version. The Last Word itself was a strange kind of ship, built specifically for this single mission and nothing else. It was small, fast, and almost entirely unarmed, carrying only enough point defense capability to survive an accidental debris strike. Its hull carried no weapon signature worth mentioning, because the engineers who designed it understood something important. A ship trying to convince a hostile fleet that it came in peace could not also look like a threat. Every design choice had been made with that single goal in mind: visible peace. Undeniable, obvious, impossible to misread peace. What the ship did carry, hidden deep in its heavily shielded core, was something far more valuable than any weapon. A complete data archive, redundant and triple encrypted, containing 6 years of Earth's most desperate and most brilliant scientific work. And carried in Elena's own memory, memorized word for word, so that even if every system on the ship failed, the message could still be delivered by voice alone, was the reason for all of it. "Captain," Marcus said suddenly, picking up new sensor sweeps. "High resolution. They're scanning us hard now." "Let them look," Elena said. "There's nothing in here we're trying to hide anymore." She thought back, as she often did in quiet moments, to the day 6 years ago, when the first compact survey ship had appeared at the edge of the solar system, and to the chain of decisions that had followed. She had not been in command then. She had been a junior officer on one of the 3 warships that intercepted the alien vessel, and she remembered vividly the fear that had driven every decision that day. Human history was full of first contacts between different groups of their own species, and it was rarely a story with a peaceful ending for whoever had less power in the room. When an armed vessel of unknown origin and unknown intention approached Earth, humanity's instinct, built over 10,000 years of hard experience, was to assume the worst and prepare for it immediately. She had fired the first shot that day, on orders, without hesitation, and for 6 years, she had wondered whether that single decision had cost humanity everything, or saved it. The 40-day war that followed had been the most terrifying experience of her life, and also, she privately admitted to herself, one of the most clarifying. Humanity had been forced to look at the true size of what it was facing, not one enemy, but a coalition, representing 100 worlds, ships and resources beyond anything Earth could match in open combat. The ceasefire, and the blockade that followed, had been a mercy that humanity did not fully appreciate at the time. It had given them 6 years. 6 years to think, to build, to prepare, and eventually, to discover something that changed the entire shape of the problem they thought they were facing. "Captain, we're being hailed," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. "Direct transmission. It's them. Put it through." The voice that came over the comm system was translated into English by the ship's systems, smooth and slightly delayed, carrying an alien cadence beneath the translation that no software could fully erase. "Human vessel last word. This is Commodore Uras, of the Kael'thari Third Fleet. You are approaching restricted space. State your intentions clearly." Elena straightened in her chair, keeping her voice level. "Commodore Uras, my intentions are exactly as stated in my broadcast. I am carrying a message from the Unified Earth Council that must be delivered to your high command as quickly as possible. I am not armed for combat. I request permission to be escorted, inspected, and brought before whoever has the authority to hear this message. Time is a factor, Commodore. I would not have risked this crossing if it were not." There was a pause, several long seconds during which Elena imagined the Commodore consulting with someone higher up the chain, perhaps the same admiral whose ships now filled her forward sensor display like a wall of slow-moving stars. "Your ship will be scanned and boarded before it is permitted to proceed further," Uras said finally. "If any weapon or hostile device is detected, you will be destroyed without further warning. Do you understand and accept these terms?" "I understand and accept," Elena said immediately. "We have nothing to hide, Commodore. Search everything. I only ask that whatever you find convinces you to let us speak." Another pause. "Reduce speed and hold position at the marked coordinates. A boarding party will meet you shortly." The channel closed. Marcus let out a breath he had clearly been holding. That went about as well as it could have. "It's not over," Elena said, adjusting the ship's course toward the coordinates the Commodore had sent. "Getting boarded is the easy part. Convincing them to listen after that is where this gets hard." The last word slowed as it approached the designated intercept point, and Elena watched through the forward viewport as the true scale of the blockade fleet became visible for the first time with her own eyes, rather than through sensor data. Ships larger than anything humanity had ever built hung in the darkness, arranged with a precision that spoke of decades, maybe centuries, of military discipline. Smaller vessels, sleek and fast, began to detach from the formation and move toward her ship, closing the distance with the unhurried confidence of predators that had never once been threatened by their prey. "Here they come," Marcus said quietly. 6 Kael'thari corvettes surrounded the last word within minutes, close enough that Elena could see the subtle blue glow of their engine ports through the viewport. A 7th, larger vessel, approached more slowly from directly ahead, and extended a boarding tube toward the small airlock near the last word's midsection, with mechanical precision. "They want us to open up," Marcus said. "Do it," Elena said. "Let them in." The airlock cycled, and Elena stood to meet whoever was coming aboard, straightening her uniform, a plain gray flight suit bearing only the small emblem of the Unified Earth Council on the left shoulder. She had thought carefully about what to wear for this moment. No military rank insignia, nothing that suggested aggression or hierarchy beyond the fact that she represented her entire species. Just a person, standing in a small ship, waiting to be searched by strangers who had every reason in the galaxy to be afraid of her. The boarding party that entered was smaller than she expected. 3 Kael'thari in armored suits, weapons drawn but not raised, moved through the ship with careful, practiced efficiency, scanning every surface, every storage compartment, every wire and panel. Elena and Marcus stood with their hands visible, saying nothing, letting the search happen. It took nearly 40 minutes. The Kael'thari found the ship's small food stores, its basic life support systems, its navigation computer, and finally, the heavily shielded data core buried in the center of the hull. One of the armored figures spoke into an internal comm, and moments later, Commodore Uras himself came through the airlock, taller than Elena had expected, his three eyes moving over her with an expression she could not fully read. "You are unarmed," Uras said, his translated voice carrying a note of what might have been surprise. "Truly unarmed. Even your data core carries no weaponized code that our engineers can detect." "I told you the truth, Commodore," Elena said. "We came to talk, not to fight." Uras studied her for a long moment. "What is in the data core?" "Proof," Elena said simply. "Proof of what I need to tell your high command. I would rather not summarize it badly here, Commodore. It deserves to be heard properly, by the people who can act on it. And if I told you that I have the authority to hear it now, and decide for myself whether it deserves to go further." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Then I would tell you that what I carry concerns every species in this fleet, every world behind your blockade line, and every world beyond it that your compact has ever claimed. I would tell you that 6 years is a long time, Commodore, and that we did not spend it idle. And I would ask you, respectfully, whether you truly want to be the officer who decided this message wasn't important enough to reach the people who can act on it, if it turns out that I am right." Something shifted in Uras's posture, a subtle change that Elena, after years of studying every scrap of intelligence humanity had gathered on Kelthari body language, recognized as genuine unease. "You speak carefully for someone who claims urgency." "I speak carefully because the truth is enormous, Commodore, and I have exactly one chance to make sure it is taken seriously. I would rather deliver it whole, to your high command, than fragment it here, and risk it being dismissed before anyone with real authority even hears it." Uras was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing something in his mind that Elena could not see. Finally, he spoke into his comm unit, a rapid string of Kelthari words that the translation software in Elena's suit only partially caught. Something about authorization, and fleet marshal, and immediate escort. "You will come with us," Uras said, turning back to Elena. "Both of you. Your ship will be secured and towed alongside. You will be brought before Fleet Marshal Catherine, who commands this entire blockade operation. If she believes your message warrants it, she has the authority to send it further, to the High Council itself." "Thank you, Commodore," Elena said, and meant it. "Do not thank me yet," Uras said. "I have not decided whether I believe you. I have only decided that the risk of being wrong is too large to ignore. If this message turns out to be a trick, human, you will not survive what comes after." "If it turns out to be a trick," Elena said quietly, "then I will have failed everyone I came here to protect, and I promise you, Commodore, dying will be the least of my worries." Uras studied her for one more long moment, then turned and gave the order. The boarding party escorted Elena and Marcus back through the airlock, into the waiting shuttle that would carry them across the vast, silent distance to Fleet Marshal Catherine's command station. And behind them, the small ship called Last Word was taken in tow by the very fleet it had been built to slip past, carrying its hidden truth one step closer to the people who most needed to hear it. Elena sat in the alien shuttle, surrounded by armed strangers from a species that had blockaded her entire world for 6 years, and felt, for the first time since launch, something close to hope. They had made it through the lines. Now came the harder part. Now she had to make them believe her, and more than that, she had to make them act in time. Fleet Marshal Catherine's command station orbited the outer edge of the Sol system, a vast ring-shaped structure, built to house the officers who coordinated the entire blockade operation. Elena had seen images of compact architecture before, gathered from the brief and violent first contact 6 years ago, but nothing had prepared her for the scale of the place in person. Corridors stretched wide enough for 3 of her own ships to fly through side by side. The ceilings glowed with soft, shifting light that seemed to respond to the movement of the people beneath it. Everything about the station spoke of resources and confidence that humanity, even after 6 years of desperate preparation, could not begin to match. She and Marcus were led through the station under heavy escort, past officers of 3 different species who stopped whatever they were doing to watch the humans pass. Elena kept her expression neutral, her posture calm, though she felt the weight of every stare. She understood exactly what she looked like to them: a curiosity, a specimen, possibly a threat that had somehow talked its way through their entire defensive line. They were brought, finally, into a large circular chamber at the heart of the station, where Fleet Marshal Catherine waited, standing beside Admiral Vren Shakal and a handful of senior officers Elena did not recognize. The chamber's walls displayed a live tactical view of the surrounding fleet, 400 ships arranged in their patient shell, a silent reminder of exactly how much power was gathered in this single system. "Captain Elena Voss," Catherine said, her translated voice carrying a formal weight, "you have crossed our blockade under a claim of urgent necessity. You have been searched and found unarmed. You now stand before the commander of this entire operation. I will hear your message, and I will decide what becomes of it. Speak." Elena had rehearsed this moment for months, had practiced the opening words so many times that they no longer felt like her own thoughts but like something carved permanently into her mind. Still, standing here, facing 3 Kael'thari eyes, and the weight of an entire alien military command structure, she found herself taking a slow breath before beginning. "6 years ago," she said, "your compact concluded, based on the war between our species, that humanity was dangerous, unpredictable, aggressive beyond what your own history had prepared you for. You built this blockade to contain that danger, while you decided what to do about it. I am not here to argue that conclusion, Fleet Marshal. I am here to tell you that during those 6 years, while your fleet watched our system and waited, our scientists were doing something else entirely. They were listening." "Listening to what?" Catherine asked. "To the same deep space signals your own listening posts must have detected as well, though perhaps you did not understand what you were hearing, because you did not yet know what to look for. 6 years ago, shortly after the ceasefire that ended our war, one of our deep space arrays picked up an anomalous pattern of radio and gravitational disturbances originating far beyond the edge of your compact's territory. At first, our scientists assumed it was a natural phenomenon, some unusual stellar event. It took 2 years of study to understand what it actually was." Elena paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be felt. It was not natural. It was the signature of something moving, something enormous, traveling through space at sublight speed, consuming everything in its path. Stars dimming in patterns that could not be explained by any natural process. Entire star systems going dark, one after another, in a slow, steady line that our scientists were able to trace and extrapolate. Admiral Shakal spoke for the first time since she had entered the chamber, his voice tight. "You are describing a fiction, a story meant to frighten us into lowering our guard." "I wish it were," Elena said, and something in her voice, some genuine grief that she did not have to fake, seemed to land harder than any argument could have. "I wish it were a fiction, Admiral. My people spent 2 years hoping it was a mistake in our instruments. It was not. We ran the calculations more than 100 times, using every method our scientists could devise, cross-checking against every scrap of astronomical data we had. The pattern is real, the star systems that went dark are real, and the trajectory, once we had enough data points to calculate it properly, pointed directly toward compact space, toward you." The chamber fell silent. Elena could feel the weight of the alien officer's attention pressing on her, could see Catherine's 3 eyes narrowing slightly, could see Vren's jaw tightening in a way that needed no translation software to understand. "We call it, in our own reports, the Long Dark," Elena continued. "We do not know what it truly is. We do not know if it is a single vast entity, or a fleet of machines, or something else entirely that our science does not have the language to describe. What we do know is this: it moves slowly, but it does not stop. It consumes matter, energy, entire planetary systems, and leaves nothing behind but darkness, where light used to be. Our best estimates, based on 6 years of careful observation and the rate at which it has been moving, place its arrival at the outer edge of compact space within 11 to 14 years, perhaps sooner, if it accelerates, which some of our models suggest it may be doing." "This is absurd," one of the other officers said, a Doraun whose name Elena did not know. "If such a threat existed, our own deep space monitoring would have detected it long ago." "Would it?" Elena asked, turning to face him directly. "Your compact has spent the last 6 years focused entirely inward, on containing my species. Every resource, every sensor array, every intelligence officer that might have been watching the deep dark beyond your borders has instead been watching Earth. I do not say this to blame you, officer. I say this because it is simply what happened. You built a wall to keep us in, and while you built it, none of you were looking at what was happening on the other side of your own territory." The silence that followed was different this time, heavier, and Elena could see the effect of her words settling into the room like a physical weight. "Even if this signal is real," Catherine said slowly, "even if something is moving through the dark and consuming what it finds, why bring this to us in such a manner? Why risk everything to cross our blockade, rather than transmitting this warning openly, through normal channels, where it could be verified without such theater?" Elena had expected this question, and she answered it carefully. "Because we tried, Fleet Marshal. 3 years ago, our scientists compiled the first draft of this data and transmitted it, encrypted, but clearly marked as urgent, through the standard diplomatic channel your own forces established for monitoring our communications. We received no response. We do not know if it was ever properly reviewed, or if it was dismissed as a trick, a piece of propaganda from a contained and desperate species trying to bargain its way free. I do not say this to accuse anyone in this room. I say it because it is the truth, and because it is the reason we eventually decided that words alone, sent through channels that had already failed once, were not enough. We needed to put a face in front of you, a person, someone who could look you in whatever eyes you have and tell you that this is not a trick, that we are not lying, that we came through your blockade not to escape, but because the truth we carry is too important to risk losing in a data packet that might simply be deleted by someone who assumed it was another human attempt at manipulation." Admiral Vren Shakal stepped forward, his 3 eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made Marcus, standing slightly behind her, visibly flinch. "You ask us to believe that your species discovered a threat to the entire compact, and your response was not to use this knowledge as a weapon against us, not to threaten us with the information, not to demand your freedom in exchange for the warning, but simply to send one small ship, unarmed, carrying nothing but data and a single officer, to walk directly into the heart of the fleet that has held your world captive for 6 years." "Yes," Elena said simply. "That is exactly what we did, Admiral." "Why?" The question came out sharper than perhaps he intended, and Elena understood, watching his face, that he was genuinely struggling to understand the choice, not because he doubted her account of events, but because it did not fit whatever model of humanity he had built in his mind over 6 years of study. Elena took a moment before answering, choosing her words with care. "Because whatever this thing is, Admiral, it does not care about the war between our species. It does not care about your blockade, or our history, or which of us fired first, 6 years ago. It will consume your worlds exactly as thoroughly as it would consume ours, given the chance, and it does not distinguish between species who fought a war and species who did not. We had 2 choices when we confirmed this threat was real. We could have kept the knowledge to ourselves, hoping that when it eventually reached your territory, you would be so weakened by the encounter that you would finally be forced to release your grip on us, and we could rebuild in the aftermath of your suffering. Or we could bring you the warning, and hope that a species capable of building a 100-world compact might also be capable of recognizing that some threats are too large for old grudges to matter anymore." She let that sit in the silence for a moment, before continuing. "We chose the second option, Admiral, not because we are especially noble, but because we ran the numbers, the same way we ran the numbers on the Long Dark itself, a galaxy where the compact survives, and remembers that humanity warned them, even after everything that happened between us, is a galaxy where humanity has a chance at a future. A galaxy where the compact falls to this threat because nobody warned them in time, is a galaxy where we are almost certainly next, alone, with no allies and no time to prepare. This was never really a choice between kindness and self-interest, Fleet Marshal. It was a choice about which version of self-interest actually made sense, once we understood what was truly coming." Catherine studied Elena for a long moment, her 3 eyes moving slowly across the human woman's face, as if searching for some tell, some flicker of deception that 6 years of studying humanity had taught the compact to look for. She found none, or if she found something, she did not say what it was. "You said your ship carries proof," Catherine said finally. "Show me." Elena reached slowly into the pocket of her flight suit and withdrew a small data crystal, holding it out with both hands, the way she had practiced, the way that could not possibly be mistaken for a weapon or a trick. "Everything is here, Fleet Marshal. 6 years of observational data, our full analysis, the mathematical models we used to calculate the trajectory and timeline, and the raw sensor logs so your own scientists can verify every step of our work themselves." We do not ask you to simply believe us, we ask you to check. Every honest scientist in your compact should be able to look at this data and reach the same conclusion we did, given enough time. One of Catherine's officers stepped forward to take the crystal, carrying it to a nearby console where the data began to unfold across the chamber's display screens, streams of numbers and star charts, and long, patient graphs showing the slow, terrible dimming of star after star along a line that curved steadily toward the heart of compact space. Vren Shakal stood very still, watching the data appear, and Elena saw something cross his face that she recognized immediately, because she had felt the exact same thing herself, 2 years ago, the first time she had seen this data laid out in full. It was the specific, cold feeling of watching an abstract fear become something real and measurable, something with a shape and a timeline and a name. 11 to 14 years, he said quietly, almost to himself. Yes, Admiral, Elena said. Which means whatever debate you have about believing me, whatever process your High Council needs to go through to decide what to do next, needs to happen quickly. Because if we are right, and I pray to whatever your people believe in that we are wrong, then every year spent arguing about whether to trust the messenger is a year you do not get back when the long dark finally arrives. The chamber remained silent for a long moment, the terrible data continuing to scroll across the walls, and Elena stood in the center of it, having delivered the message she had crossed an armed blockade to bring, and waited to find out whether 6 years of careful, patient enemies were capable of becoming, quickly enough to matter, something else entirely. The data from Elena's crystal spread through the compact faster than she expected. Fleet Marshal Catherine, to her credit, did not waste time debating whether to take the warning seriously before verifying it. Within an hour, she had assigned a team of her own science officers to examine the human data, alongside every scrap of deep space monitoring the compact possessed. Within 6 hours, that team returned, with a report that made even the most skeptical of the Kelthari officers go quiet. The human data was not perfect. Compact instruments were, in many ways, more precise than anything humanity had built, capable of gathering finer detail across greater distances. But when Catherine's scientists pointed those superior instruments toward the region of space the human data indicated, adjusting their search parameters based on the patterns Earth's scientists had already identified, they found exactly what Elena had described. Stars dimming in ways that defeated every natural explanation. A slow, patient line of darkness spreading across a stretch of the galaxy that the compact had never bothered to monitor closely, because it lay beyond the edge of any world they had ever bothered to claim. It's real, said Senek, the lead Kelthari astrophysicist assigned to the verification effort, standing before Catherine and Vren in a smaller briefing room 3 days after Elena's arrival. Senek had the look of someone who had not slept properly since receiving the assignment, his 3 eyes rimmed with the dark shadows of exhaustion. I wish I could tell you the humans were wrong, Fleet Marshal. I have run every check I know how to run, and I cannot make this data say anything other than what they claim it says. Something is moving through that region of space, consuming stellar systems as it goes, and based on our own extended monitoring over these past 3 days, it is not slowing down. Timeline, Catherine said. Consistent with the human estimate, 11 to 13 years before it reaches the outer edge of our territory, assuming its current rate of travel holds steady. If it accelerates, as some of the human models suggest it might, that timeline could shrink significantly. Vren sat with his hands folded tightly in front of him, saying little, though his mind was working through implications faster than he could organize them into words. 6 years of blockade, 6 years of careful watching and waiting, and the entire time, something far larger than the question of human aggression had been creeping steadily closer to everything the compact had built. He thought of the resources spent maintaining 400 warships around a single star system. He thought of the intelligence officers, the diplomats, the endless committees and reports, all of it focused entirely on the question of whether humanity could be trusted, while somewhere in the dark beyond their borders, an answer to a far more important question had been arriving, whether anyone was paying attention or not. We need to bring this before the High Council, Catherine said, immediately, not through the usual channels, not through months of committee review. This requires direct emergency session. The Council will ask why we did not detect this ourselves, Vren said. The Council will ask many uncomfortable questions, Admiral, and we will answer them honestly. because the alternative is far worse. Catherine's 3 eyes turned toward him, sharp with something that might have been anger, though Vren suspected it was directed less at him, and more at the situation itself. I have spent 6 years of my career on this blockade, certain that we were doing the responsible thing, the cautious thing. And in that time, a species we judged too dangerous to trust has apparently spent those same 6 years watching the dark on our behalf, because they understood, better than we did, that some threats do not care about old grievances. Vren did not have a good answer to that. He had spent the last 3 days turning the same thought over in his mind, unable to find a comfortable place to set it down. The emergency session of the High Council convened 4 days after Elena's arrival, held in the Grand Assembly Chamber of the Compact's Central Government Station, a massive structure orbiting the Kael'thari homeworld itself. Elena had never expected to be present for something like this. She had assumed, when she volunteered for this mission, that her role would end once the message was delivered to whoever commanded the blockade, that the actual decisions would be made far away, by people she would never meet, in rooms she would never enter. Instead, she found herself standing before the assembled representatives of every species in the Compact, more aliens gathered in a single room than she had ever imagined seeing in her lifetime. All of them turned toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "Captain Voss," said the presiding council member, an elderly Dorun named Farhes, whose stone-gray skin had faded almost to white with age, "you understand that what you ask of this council is not simple. You ask us to accept, on the word of a species we went to war with only 6 years ago, that an unknown threat approaches from beyond our borders, and that our response to this threat should include releasing the very blockade we built specifically because we did not trust your intentions." "I understand exactly how difficult this is," Elena said. "I would ask the council to remember that I am not asking you to trust us blindly. I am asking you to trust your own scientists, who have independently verified the data we brought. The threat is real whether or not you release the blockade, Counselor. That part is no longer in question. The only real question before this council is what you intend to do about it, and whether keeping 400 warships pointed at my home system is the best use of resources you are going to need very badly, very soon." A ripple of reaction moved through the assembled council members, some of it clearly hostile to the bluntness of her answer, but Elena noticed, watching carefully, that several of the representatives exchanged glances that suggested agreement rather than offense. A YIS representative, small and quick-moving, spoke next, her voice sharp even through translation. "The YIS Concordance has 3 colony worlds directly in the projected path of this threat, based on the data your scientists provided. If this is accurate, we do not have the luxury of a lengthy debate about trust, Counselor Farhes. We have perhaps a decade to prepare, and every month spent arguing is a month we cannot get back. And if this is an elaborate deception," another council member countered, "designed specifically to convince us to release our guard against a species that has already demonstrated it can defeat our forces in open combat when sufficiently motivated?" "Then explain to me," Elena said, before anyone else could respond, "why a deception designed to make you release your guard would come with independently verifiable astronomical data that your own scientists have confirmed using your own instruments. If we wanted to trick you into lowering your defenses, Counselor, we would have told you a story you could not check. We told you the truth, and gave you everything you needed to verify it yourselves, because the truth was the only thing we had that we believed would actually work." The debate continued for hours, longer than Elena had expected, longer than she thought her patience could withstand. But she stood through all of it, answering every question as honestly and directly as she could, watching the mood of the room shift slowly, argument by argument, from suspicion toward something that might eventually become cooperation. It was Admiral Vren Shakal, unexpectedly, who spoke the words that seemed to finally tip the balance. He had been granted permission to address the council as the officer who had commanded the blockade throughout its duration, and Elena watched him rise, uncertain what he would say, given everything she knew of his role in her people's containment. "I have spent 6 years believing that humanity represented the greatest threat this compact had encountered since our expansion began," he said, his translated voice carrying through the chamber with a weight that silenced the room. "I built my entire strategy, my entire understanding of this species, around the assumption that they would use any advantage against us the moment they found one. Captain Voss has just demonstrated, in the clearest possible terms, that this assumption was wrong. She found an advantage, information that could have been used to bargain for her people's freedom, information that could have been withheld and used as a weapon once the threat eventually arrived and weakened us. Instead, she brought it directly to the people who had imprisoned her world for 6 years, at personal risk, because she judged that some threats matter more than old grievances. He paused, and Elena saw something shift in his posture, some old certainty finally giving way. I do not say this because I have suddenly decided humanity is harmless. I do not believe that, and I do not think Captain Voss would want me to believe it. I say this because a species capable of this kind of judgment, this kind of long-term thinking under pressure, is not a species we can afford to treat as merely a threat to be contained. If the long dark is real, and our own scientists confirm that it is, then we are going to need every capable ally this galaxy can offer. And I believe, having watched this crew and this captain for 4 days now, that humanity is exactly the kind of ally worth having. The chamber fell into a different kind of silence after that, and Elena, standing at the center of it, allowed herself for the first time since launch to believe that this might actually work. The council did not reach a final decision that day. Such decisions, Elena was learning, moved through compact bureaucracy with a slowness that would have driven any human council to open rebellion. But something had shifted in the room, some fundamental recalculation that she could see reflected in the changed postures and quieter tones of representatives who had begun the session, convinced she was either a liar or a threat. By the time the session adjourned, with a promise to reconvene within 3 days to vote on a formal response, Elena understood that the hardest part of her mission, the part she had feared most, delivering the message and being believed, had succeeded. What remained, she knew, was harder still. Belief was not the same as action, and 11 years, though it sounded like a long time, was not nearly long enough to prepare an unprepared galaxy for what was coming. As she left the assembly chamber, escorted once again by compact officers who now regarded her with something closer to wary respect than open hostility, Elena found Admiral Vren Shakal waiting for her in the corridor outside. "You did not have to say what you said in there," she told him. "No," he agreed, "I did not have to. But 6 years of watching your species from a distance taught me things about you that I never fully admitted to myself, Captain, until I watched you stand in that room and tell the truth to people who had every reason to want to hear a lie. I have spent this entire operation assuming humanity's greatest danger was its aggression. I am beginning to suspect that your greatest danger, to threats like the one you have just warned us about, might actually be your stubbornness, your refusal to give up, even when the cost is enormous, even when the reward is uncertain." "Is that a compliment, Admiral?" "It is an observation," Vren said, and something in his three-eyed expression suggested it might have been the closest thing to a compliment his species was capable of offering. "One I intend to remember, as we decide together what comes next." Elena nodded, and together they walked back toward the docking bay, where the last word waited, still under compact escort, still far from truly free, but no longer entirely a prisoner either. Behind them, throughout the vast compact government station, the news of the human warning was already spreading, moving from council chamber to military command to civilian population, and across 100 worlds, people who had spent 6 years believing their greatest concern was a contained and dangerous species called humanity, began, for the first time, to understand that a far greater darkness was already on its way, and that the species they had blockaded might be the very ally they needed most to survive it. 3 days after the emergency council session, the High Council of the Kelthari Compact reconvened to vote on the most significant policy change in the Compact's recorded history. Elena stood once more before the assembly, though this time she was not alone. Beside her stood a small delegation that had arrived from Earth 2 days earlier, having been granted, for the first time in 6 years, permission to pass through the blockade under compact escort. Among them was Dr. Amara Ose, the lead scientist who had first identified the long dark signal, and Counselor James Whitfield, the senior diplomat who had spent the last 6 years preparing for exactly this kind of negotiation, hoping it would never actually be necessary. The vote itself took less time than the debate that preceded it. When Counselor Farhas finally called for a decision, the response came back with a majority that surprised even Elena, who had spent every day since her arrival trying to gauge the shifting mood of a government she barely understood. The blockade of Earth would be lifted, Not gradually, not with conditions attached that would take years to satisfy, but immediately, effective from the moment the vote was finalized. In its place, the Council authorized the formation of something entirely new in Compact history, a formal alliance between the Kael'thari Compact and the Unified Earth Council, built specifically around the shared threat of the approaching Long Dark. The details would take months to fully negotiate. Everyone understood that. Questions of trade, of shared technology, of military cooperation, and joint command structures, all of these would require careful and often difficult discussion. But the fundamental decision had been made. Humanity was no longer a contained threat to be watched from behind a wall of warships. Humanity was, as of that vote, a partner in the most important project the galaxy had ever faced, preparing for a threat that did not care about borders, blockades, or old wars. Admiral Vren Shakal received new orders within hours of the vote's confirmation. His 400 warships, which had spent 6 years arranged in a slow, patient shell around the Sol system, would be repositioned. Some would remain in the region temporarily, no longer as a blockade, but as a joint task force, working alongside newly authorized human vessels to begin mapping the true extent of the Long Dark's approach. The rest would begin the long journey back toward Compact Core territory, where the real work of preparation was only just beginning. Vren found Elena on the observation deck of the Watchful Accord 2 days after the vote, watching through the great viewport as the first human construction ships began arriving in the system, no longer sneaking past sensor sweeps or hiding behind careful misdirection, but flying openly, escorted by compact vessels rather than pursued by them. "It is a strange thing," he said, coming to stand beside her, "to watch 6 years of careful strategy dismantled in the space of a single week." "Does it bother you?" Elena asked, "being wrong about us for so long?" Vren considered the question seriously before answering, which she had come to understand was simply how his species approached most things. "I do not think I was entirely wrong, Captain. Humanity is dangerous. I have seen the data from our own war, the speed with which your engineers adapted to unfamiliar technology, the willingness of your people to fight when they believed fighting was necessary. That danger has not disappeared simply because we are now allies. I think, rather, that I misunderstood what kind of danger it truly was. I believed it was a danger aimed at us. I am beginning to understand it may instead be a danger you are willing to aim on behalf of others, when the cause is worth it." "That's a generous interpretation, Admiral." "It is an accurate one, based on everything I have observed since your ship crossed our blockade line." He turned to look at her directly, his 3 eyes carrying an expression she had learned, over the past week, to recognize as something close to respect. "The Long Dark will test every species in this alliance, human and compact alike. It will test resources we have not yet built, strategies we have not yet devised, and courage that many of us have not yet been asked to show. I do not know if this new alliance will be enough to survive what is coming, but I know that facing it without you, now that I understand what your people are capable of, would have been a far worse position than the one we find ourselves in today." Elena was quiet for a moment, watching the construction ships continue their steady work below, the first visible sign of a partnership that would need to grow far larger and far faster than either species had ever attempted before. 11 years isn't very long, Admiral, not for what we're going to need to build. New defenses, new ways of communicating and coordinating between species who barely trust each other, entirely new technology that neither of us has developed yet. There's a real chance we run out of time no matter what we do now. "There is," Vren agreed, "but there was also a real chance, Captain, that your message never reached anyone capable of acting on it. That my orders that day had been different. That my fleet had reacted to your approach with force rather than caution. That the Council had dismissed your warning as a trick before our scientists ever had the chance to verify it. Every step of this has depended on choices that could easily have gone the other way. I choose to see that as a reason for hope rather than despair. If we have already survived this many moments where everything could have failed, perhaps we are capable of surviving the moments still ahead of us." Elena allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one she had felt in what seemed like months. "You're more of an optimist than I expected, Admiral, for someone who spent 6 years planning for the worst. Perhaps that is exactly why," Vren said. "A person who has spent years preparing for disaster learns, eventually, to recognize when preparation has actually paid off." Below them, in the growing cluster of human and compact vessels, now working side by side in the space that had once been a battlefront, the first joint survey mission was preparing to depart, carrying scientists from both species toward the edge of known space, where they would begin the long and difficult work of understanding exactly what the Long Dark truly was, and what it would take to stop it, or at the very least, to survive its arrival. It was the first of what would eventually become hundreds of such missions, the first small step in a partnership that neither species had ever expected to need, born out of a threat that made 6 years of fear and suspicion between two proud species suddenly seem very small in comparison to what was still to come. Back on Earth, the news of the blockade's end spread with a speed that surprised even the council members, who had spent years preparing contingency plans for exactly this outcome. Elena watched the broadcasts from her temporary quarters aboard the compact station, footage of crowds gathering in cities across the planet, some celebrating, some frightened by the enormity of what the Alliance would demand of them in the years ahead, most simply relieved that 6 years of isolation, of rationing and uncertainty, and the constant awareness of alien warships watching from orbit, had finally come to an end. Dr. Amara Osei found her there, carrying a small data tablet with the latest reports from the Joint Scientific Committee that had been established only days earlier. "The preliminary numbers are in," she said, settling into the seat across from Elena. "Compact engineering, combined with our own research on the Long Dark signal. If the projections hold, and if both governments commit the resources they've promised, we might actually have a real chance at this. Not certainty. Nobody's promising certainty, but a real chance." "That's more than we had a week ago," Elena said. "It's more than we had a week ago," Amara agreed, "because you got on a ship with almost no weapons, and flew it straight into the middle of 400 warships that had every reason in the world to destroy you before you got close enough to say a single word." Elena thought about that moment, the long 2 hours of acceleration toward the blockade line, the calm she had forced herself to project for Marcus's sake, even as her own heart had pounded with a fear she never fully admitted to anyone. "I had to believe it would work," she said finally. "Not because I was certain, but because the alternative was worse. If I didn't try, and the Long Dark arrived anyway, we would have faced it completely alone, with an enemy fleet at our door, and a far greater threat behind them. Trying gave us a chance, not trying guaranteed we'd have none. You could have died out there, easily, if Uras's fleet had reacted differently, if the Council had dismissed the data, if any one of a dozen things had gone wrong." "I know," Elena said quietly. "I thought about that a great deal, on the way out. In the end, it didn't change the decision. Some risks are worth taking, even when the odds aren't in your favor, because the cost of not taking them is worse than the cost of failing." Amara studied her for a long moment, then set the data tablet down between them, the screen still showing the latest projections, cautious numbers built from 6 years of human research and days of newly shared compact expertise. 11 years, she said. "It's not much time, but it's more than we had a week ago, and it's more than we would have had if this alliance had never happened." Outside the viewport, the joint fleet continued its work, human ships and compact vessels moving together for the first time in history, no longer enemies watching each other across a line neither dared to cross, but partners beginning the long, uncertain work of preparing for something far larger than either species had ever faced alone. The blockade that had held Earth captive for 6 years was gone, dismantled in the space of a single vote, and in its place stood something neither humanity nor the compact had expected to build, a fragile, urgent, and entirely necessary alliance, forged not from friendship or shared history, but from the simple, undeniable truth that the darkness moving steadily through the void beyond their borders did not care about old grievances and would not wait for either species to be ready. Elena Voss watched the fleet below, thought of the message she had carried, the terrifying truth that had once seemed impossible to deliver, and understood, finally, that delivering it had only been the beginning. The real work, the work of building something strong enough to survive what was coming, was only just starting, for both her species and the one that had once held them prisoner behind an unbreakable wall of ships. 11 years remained before the Long Dark reached the edge of compact space. It was not much time, but for the first time since the war that had started it all, humanity did not face what was coming alone, and somewhere in that single fact, Elena allowed herself to believe lay the very thin but very real chance that both species might actually survive, to see what waited on the other side of the darkness still to come.